Hello and welcome to my talk this afternoon. I'm very excited to be here and very excited to share the lessons I've learned from my first 18 months in Scala. So some background on me. Hello, I'm Monica McGuigan. I'm a junior software engineer currently working for the financial services company JP Morgan. So I'm working in a team that has a platform which allows the bank to better understand its data and data models, and the back end is written predominantly in Scala. So previous to this, I was studying physics at university, and during my degree, I had the chance to do a year-long placement. So I joined the same team I'm in now. However, back then, I was mainly doing front-end development. So my experience was mainly JavaScript, TypeScript, and I'd done some C# and C++ at university. So after the year-long placement, I went back, finished my degree, graduated, and roll on starting as a graduate software engineer. So I rejoined the same team. However, this time round, I was destined to be a back-end Scala developer. So right from the start, I was really thrown in the deep end. I had to learn very quickly how does the back end of the platform work, what are the tools and libraries that my team uses, and underpinning all of this was really having to learn Scala. So how did I learn Scala quickly and effectively enough in order to become productive? So when trying to answer this question, 3 key themes kept on coming up. So first was understanding that I was going to make lots of mistakes, and that in order to grow and develop as an engineer, I had to learn from them and take ownership of them. Next was, how do I better communicate? How do I help others to help me and ask questions in a way that they can understand me very easily? And finally, what joins us all here together today is community. So joining the community of Scala developers has taught me so much already, and is what led me to doing this talk today. So I'd quite like to share what my perspective on these kind of things were, but also what I wish the senior developers that I worked with knew. So when learning anything new, especially in the very beginning, and especially as a junior developer, you're going to make lots of mistakes. It's part and parcel of the learning journey, and especially with Scala, where it can be quite a steep learning curve at the start. Getting used to this feeling of failing and getting used to understanding why have I made this mistake and how do I learn from it is integral to becoming a better developer. So you'll learn a lot more from what you failed at and what you made a mistake in, and when you learned how to correct it rather than what you did first time round. This is something that you never stop doing as a developer, and it's integral to getting better, especially at Scala. So why am I a good person to make this claim? Well, simply put, I was very much, and still am, that developer, that person who made lots of mistakes and have subsequently learned from them. So in my first 6 months, I was given a task where I had to write a feature which had some business logic in it, and at the end, I had to return a string value. So I like to write code in, I guess, the same way most people do, very iteratively. So I wrote my first pass at it, and in the end, I did a map of string to string, because I was thinking about what value I wanted to return from this business logic. So once I'd gotten to my kind of first working version, I went to go ask one of my colleagues for some feedback. And very quickly, I was expecting him to go through the business logic part and pull that apart. But very quickly, he pointed out, why are you doing a map of string to string? That's completely unnecessary. The last line of a function is what Scala takes as its return value. And as I said, I did this about 6 months in. So just because I'm no longer a complete beginner doesn't mean that I don't make these kind of mistakes. But the important part is, as soon as I did it, I haven't done it since, and I've learned why it was wrong, and I learned why it was a mistake. So this kind of leads me into the concept of a developer's rubber duck. So when I first started my job, I found myself asking a lot of questions. I found myself going up to the senior developers on my team and wanting to talk through the problems I was having. And it was only when I would start to kind of verbalize what I was trying to work on and what I was trying to work through that I'd be able to kind of see the solution for myself. And so, what does this have to do with a rubber duck? A colleague of mine told me a story about, in his first year of his computer science degree, in the first week, the members of staff gave each student a rubber duck. And the entire point of it was to sit on their desk and to act as a sounding board for them to talk through their problems with. So you'll be amazed at how much more clearly you can think when you have someone or something to talk to. And as a junior developer, you kind of have to figure this out about yourself. How do you work through problems? And for me, most of the time, it's actually speaking to my colleagues and being able to talk through things. But to my advice to the junior developers is find out what your rubber duck is. So that's my advice to the juniors. Now on to the senior developers. It's inevitable when you have new people join your team, especially if they're new to Scala, that they are going to make lots of mistakes. And for junior developers, during this time, let us fail. I know it's really tempting to jump in and to kind of want to solve all of our problems for us. And whilst this is good in a way that it shows us your logic and reasoning and your thought processes, understanding how we solve these problems is something that we have to develop for ourselves. And we have to be able to build up this run book of how do I take this problem and how do I break it down into small, manageable chunks. Allowing us the time and space to do so will pay dividends in the future when we eventually become confident and resilient developers who can go on to tackle complex problems. So, following on from this, let us solve the easy problems. When I first started learning Scala, implementing the easy features, implementing the kind of small problems, small tasks, to me felt like a huge win. And it meant that I was able to go off with much more confidence to solve increasingly more difficult problems. So after kind of solving these problems, I would end up having a confidence boost, and I was able to go on and solve these more and more complex problems. And I was eventually able to kind of build out my run book of how do I tackle this issue that I'm facing, and what are the tools that I have at my disposal to understand what I'm working on and break it down and work on it. So that was a little bit on making mistakes and how you need to take ownership of them for your development. And next is, how do you help others to help you? So as a junior developer, when you've come across a problem that you don't know how to solve and you're trying to figure out, you have to ask a question to somebody else. How do you effectively communicate what you're trying to ask? How do you help others help you? And I think the answer is very much rooted in a skill that I guess is overlooked in our jobs, which is effective communication. So being able to convey what you're trying to ask very clearly to get help from who you're speaking to. So I found when I was just starting out, I was asking lots and lots of questions, which is inevitable when it's a new platform and a new language. But a lot of the time, I would kind of ask these questions without any context, and it would end up being a very frustrating process where, the developer I was working with wouldn't know what I was talking about, and it'd be very difficult to convey my question. So in the beginning, there was very much an information overload of what am I trying to solve? How do I even discern between what I do and don't know? And I very quickly had to realize that the kind of problems I was facing would be split into two categories. So one would be context. So why are we doing this in the way that we are? What are we working on? What is the feature? What do I not understand about it? And the other would be the Scala. So why is it being implemented in this way? I don't understand how this function works or what we're trying to do. So when I have a question about context, I have a bit of a checklist I like to go through. So first up is always read the docs. As a junior developer, you never want to ask somebody a question and the first thing they say to you is, have you read the docs? And the answer is no. That's highly embarrassing, and the developer you're talking to won't appreciate the kind of time being wasted. Next is, if the issue that I'm having understanding is to do with the code, I like to look at the code in the context of the PR or the change that was made with it. So a bit of a caveat is this only really works when you have good descriptive PRs that only contain the kind of changes that are relevant to that feature. And lastly, when I want to know kind of the bigger picture things, I tend to ask these questions during one-to-ones with senior developers or kind of my manager. And it means I get to really pick their brains on the hows and whys as opposed to kind of surface level questions. So on the flip side, when it comes to the problem with Scala, I again have a bit of a checklist that I like to go through. So when the issue I'm facing is, how do I implement this function from the standard library, or kind of a really basic thing, the first thing I always check is the internet. And the chances are that somebody somewhere has already asked the question on Stack Overflow or any of the other resources online. So when this fails, when this doesn't answer my question, the next thing I like to do is to reach out to the developers that I work with. So as I said in the beginning, I would ask a lot of questions just off the bat, no context, go straight into it. And unsurprisingly, this was a very frustrating process where I wasn't getting my question answered and the senior developer that I was talking to wasn't understanding what I was trying to say. So I had to start phrasing my questions a little bit differently using this formula. So first would be context. What am I actually trying to work on? What is the repository that I'm in? What feature am I trying to implement? Then next is, what is the goal you're actually trying to achieve? What are you trying to do? The next bit would be question. So what are you actually struggling with? What do you need help with? And finally, previous attempts. You should always try and attempt something for yourself first. And as a junior developer, this is something that you'll learn about yourself, and you'll learn the balance between attempting something for yourself before asking for help. So on the other side of these interactions, the senior developers. So when we come to you for help, we're not asking you to implement the thing for us or solve the problem for us. We're looking to kind of learn, how do we solve this for ourselves? I've been very lucky to join a team where the developers that I work with are very good at long-term laziness. So what do I mean by this? They've helped me in a way that they've shown me how to do something as opposed to just doing it for me. And as a result, when I face the same problem over and over, I won't come back to them and ask them the same question. I'll be able to tackle that problem or something similar to it by myself. So, how do they do this? First, they will usually have me kind of tell the story of my problem. And not only does this help give them some context on what I'm working on, but as I said with the developer's rubber duck, just verbalizing my issue would a lot of the time lead me to actually seeing the solution for myself. And when this doesn't work, they'll usually go on to ask me some leading questions. So first would be, what are you trying to do, or what are you expecting the code that you've written to actually do? Next is, what have you changed? Even things that you think are unrelated, tell me everything that you've changed. And sometimes we just need a reminder of, is your code actually up to date with the remote? Do you have all the latest changes? So after asking me these questions, usually there'll be two outcomes. So first will be, as a result of being asked these questions, I've kind of seen the problem myself, or we've discussed it and I've been able to come to a conclusion by myself and go on to solve the problem. On the other hand, asking me these questions has shown you that I have a lack of knowledge that I've needed to be taught or I've needed to be told, and I've been able to go off with this newly acquired knowledge and solve the problem for myself. So this is what I say by long-term laziness, is that you've kind of taught me in this way where I've been able to do it for myself rather than you doing it for me. Investing the time and energy up front will pay dividends in the future when we become resilient and confident engineers who can go on to tackle a multitude of problems. So this mostly goes without saying, but I think it's an important point to make, where not all junior developers are equal. I think this is especially relevant when we see more and more people coming into software engineering who aren't from a traditional computer science background. And as somebody who studied physics, how I approach problems in my learning process is going to be different. And functional programming doesn't come easy for everybody. It will for some, but especially when there's that shift in paradigm from OOP to functional, this can be quite a difficult challenge. I know I found this quite difficult in the beginning. So tailoring how you communicate with junior developers, but also everybody else that you work with, will help you get the most out of those interactions and help you work better together with your juniors. So this takes us on to the final part of our talk today. So we've seen why it's important to make and take ownership of mistakes, especially in the beginning. We've learned how to effectively ask questions and how to help others help you. And finally is community. So, as I said, part of the reason why I've enjoyed learning Scala so much this past 18 months has been joining the community of Scala developers. So it's something quite comforting about knowing that you're not alone in your struggles and that other people have gone through that difficulty in overcoming the learning curve that comes with Scala. So developing as an engineer encompasses so much more than the functional code that you write. It's how do I set up my ID, how do I set up the build tool, how do I write good PRs? And the main way that I've learned this is through pair programming. So pairing where two developers sit at one desk and work on a problem together definitely has its pros and cons. So pairing together on something, especially having two engineers pairing on something, does not mean that the problem is going to be solved in half the time. There's been plenty of times where I've worked with a senior developer and it's taken us far longer to implement the feature than it was if they'd just done it themselves. And also, sometimes pair programming doesn't work for every feature. Sometimes you need to be able to sit and go through your thought processes without having to verbalize to somebody else and talk through all the blind alleys that you end up going down. Saying this, there's lots of pros to it. So pairing together will end up leading to code with fewer and far between bugs. This is because you're having a live PR as you're writing the code. Next is, by the end of it, you have not just one, but two developers who intimately understand and know the code that you've written. And something that I've definitely been guilty of before is when I've been reviewing other people's PRs, is that if there's no glaringly obvious red flags and the builds pass, the tests pass, I will approve that PR without really understanding what the entire change is or the implications of all the design decisions being made. So pairing together on especially more complex features means that you have two developers who really understand why they've done things in the way that they have. Next is, it's a very easy way to transfer coding best practices. So you're able to kind of walk through a junior developer and explain all the ways in which your team writes code in the way they do. And as you're doing it live, it's more likely to sink in because they're getting that feedback instantly rather than having to wait for the traditional cycle of they write some code, create a PR, wait for comments, and iterate. You're doing it live, so it's much more likely to sink in and for them to take it on board. And finally, pairing with somebody, especially like the different senior developers on my team, has helped me to feel very welcome and very included in the team. And it's also allowed me to sit and work with a developer closely and see all their different thought processes, see the way that they solve problems, and learn from that. So to the experienced developers, from a junior developer's perspective, we are not going to want to ask you or want to kind of make you go out of your way to pair with us. So making it known that you're available and that you want to pair is greatly appreciated. So if you're an engineering lead, for example, and you're assigning more complex tasks or features to juniors, just saying at the time, I'm available if you want to pair on this, is so appreciated. And sometimes juniors are not going to take you up on the offer, but making yourself available really is very helpful and it's really appreciated. So another type of programming, group programming, I hadn't heard of before I started my job was mob programming. So this is the idea where a group of developers sit together in a room and work together on different features or different kind of problem that they're trying to solve. And the team I'm in now has weekly 1-hour-long mob programming sessions. But instead of working on features for our day-to-day work, we've been looking at different side projects. So some of these side projects that we've been looking at have been, the first one we did was implementing a very simple Twitter clone. So we were using different Scala libraries to implement normal endpoints. We did some GraphQL, and we were also using cat's effect for our effect type. More recently, we implemented some code for a WebSocket server, a WebSocket chat room, where we were using WebSocket, and we had a very simple Elm front-end UI. And being able to learn these different Scala libraries in what is a very stress-free, very no consequences environment has been so helpful for my development and my learning. I've been able to look at how these Scala libraries work without having to think about the consequences of, this is something that's actually going to go into production. It's very much stress-free and kind of allows junior developers to learn in a way where they don't have to be seen to understand everything first time, because if you don't implement this endpoint, there's no consequences to it. So being able to learn Scala in this way has been a very welcome break from the kind of complexities of the domain. And I found that sometimes working on trying to understand the context of the problems I've been working on in my kind of day-to-day job has actually been more difficult than the actual Scala itself. So how did these opportunities come about for my team? Over the past 4 to 5 years, we've regularly had interns who have joined and that have needed to learn Scala. So we've had to find a way to teach Scala in an effective and kind of community-building way. This, combined with developers who are passionate about teaching Scala and passionate about passing on best practices, was what led to these mob programming sessions. And what I've really enjoyed about it the most is the variety of topics that we've covered and how it's led and encouraged discussions and kind of deeper thinking about, I've seen this problem that I have in mob programming, how can I apply this to my day-to-day job? So mentoring and teaching is something that I thought was very much reserved for senior developers. However, when I first started, in the past 6 months, we had an intern join our team who I ended up helping do his kind of onboarding. So he was in a similar position to me where he was a placement student and he didn't know the language, he didn't know the platform, and I was able to kind of onboard him and teach him Scala in a way that was kind of non-intimidating and very friendly, and he knew that I knew the challenges that he was going through because I'd been through them in the past year. So it was a massive indicator of how much I'd learned and how much progression I'd made in my Scala when I went to actually teach somebody what I knew. So addressing the junior developers, when you get the opportunity, share what you've learned, share with other people that are going through similar problems, because then you'll really see how far you've come and how much you know. I've also been very lucky that I've been able to learn Scala in a more formal way. Once a week, one of the senior developers that I work with hosts weekly Scala study sessions. To begin with, these sessions were really going through different courses and learning the basic Scala syntax and Scala ideas. After that, we moved on to some live coding sessions. So we went through JSON and how you represent it as an ADT. We did the encoders and decoders for them. We looked at property-based testing and generating arbitrary instances, and also writing some parser combinators for them. The most recent challenge has been to go off and implement what we've seen in these live coding sessions on our own. And for me, this is what's made the biggest difference in my day-to-day code, is actually taking these ideas and concepts and doing them for myself. Now, I understand that running these sessions is a huge investment on the part of the senior developer running them, but I've really seen the benefit of them and have really enjoyed being able to be taught in this kind of more structured, formal way. To the experienced developers, You can have a very key role in creating these learning opportunities for junior developers. So kind of sharing, it can range from sharing your willingness to pair all the way up to actually taking the time and effort to prepare sessions like this. So if you don't already do this, please consider how you can implement these ideas in your communities. Learning Scala has been no easy feat. It's been 18 months of lots of new experiences with a few mistakes here and there. To the junior developers, I hope what I've said when implemented, will make your life and learning journey a lot easier. And failing that, it will at least give you some comfort in knowing that you're not alone in overcoming the sometimes steep Scala learning curve. It's crucial to accept and understand that you're going to make mistakes, but learning from them is what's going to make you grow the most as a developer. Get into the habit of telling the story of your problem. The people that you ask your 1,000,001 questions to will thank you for it. And finally, when you get the chance, connect with your peers. Learn from them, but also take the chance to teach. To the senior developers, I hope this has given you an insight into the mind of a rookie Scala engineer and to show you what the experience of learning Scala is like 20 years on from its inception. Allow us to fail and make mistakes, but help us to grow and learn from them. Your knowledge and expertise in how to become better communicators is what we need from you, so guide us and lead us to doing that. And finally, you can have a key role in creating these communities for your junior developers, and when the opportunity arises, please take it. So I'd like to say a quick thank you to my team for their mentorship and support, and to the Scalar for organising a great conference so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monica.